Here to talk about his comedy career and update us on his midlife crisis is Noel Fielding.
Hello.
Welcome.
Can I just say for the record, I'm 35.
Okay.
No, I'm not. But I realised when I came to America and North America, I should have just lied about my age because no one knows that I'm 40. So they go, "You 40, really?" And I'm like, "I've really messed up."
I wouldn't have guessed it, to be honest.
I know I've messed up.
Well, we'll get into all that a little bit later. But first off, I noticed on your Twitter that you went to a hockey game.
Yes, it was amazing.
Yeah, what was that like?
Never been to a hocky game. Thought I should do it.
I would guess so, yeah.
Check it out. And the Maple Leafs, they came through. I bought a hockey mask. I was quite pleased with that.
Oh, what do you mean a hockey? Like a goalie mask?
Yeah, like a sort of Friday the 13th job. Pretty happy with that. I was sort of in the shop going, what can I get? A puck? God, I don't know, a shirt. It's not really me. And then I saw that and went, yes, Jason.
Well, what did you think of the whole hockey experience?
It's kind of like there's a lot of anticipation, a lot of music, a lot of organ playing, a lot of people shouting, and all of a sudden they start and you don't even notice, and then someone scores and you're like, what? I wasn't even facing the right way. I don't know what's going on.
And it's so small, right?
Yeah.
The puck, yeah.
But I was sitting next to some sort of local Torontonians and a lady and her daughter, and they were sort of filling me in on all the details. And they were quite obsessed with Carlton, the bear. Is it the bear? Carlton, that's his name, the mascot. And he just was sort of having a loll of a time. I suddenly thought, if this all goes wrong for me, I might try and get his job. He just seemed to be sort of rolling about, getting drunk, pushing people over. I thought, this is the best job in the world. I thought I had the best job.
I'm glad you're taken in the city. You went to Kensington Market, is that right?
Yeah, a few times, yeah. We couldn't really we tried to sort of get through all the vintage shops in Kensington Market, but we didn't really make it, so we had to come back the next day. Which, your vintage stuff's so cheap here, it's crazy.
Oh, is yours expensive?
Yeah, like ludicrously.
Wow.
Yeah, because, so here it's like, oh my God.
Well, isn't that the whole point of vintage? It's like cheaper?
Could you please explain that to the people in England? Because I've got no money left. But I was like, this is amazing. I've got to buy another suitcase. There's just so much good stuff.
Good.
I'm loving Toronto.
That is good for our Torontonian listeners to hear. Tell me a bit about your tour. Now, this show features some stand-up, but it's not a straight stand-up show. You have animation, you have music going on. Why?
Well, the Boosh was it became such a big thing that we started doing arenas, and then we had to build the show quite big. It was like music, and we had a band that came on with us, and Julian plays guitar anyway, and we both sing a bit. So we had like a bass player and a drummer, and Rich Fulcher played keyboard, and Dave can sing really well, like Judas Priest. So we had a good band anyway. We were trying to make it sort of like Frank Zappa, sort of Parliament, Funkadelic. That was our stuff we were into. So we were always trying to sort of emulate that and make the music good. But so we had like back projection, revolving stage, a band. It was like a big shenanigan. So when I made this show, I sort of forgot that I'd be doing slightly smaller venues because it's just a solo project. So I kind of just went at it the same way I'd go at a Boosh show. So there's kind of music and there's sketches and there's a bit of a story. And at one point I go into the audience, there's characters, there's animation. We put someone in an animation. We take a volunteer from the audience. I get kidnapped in the show. There's a lot going on. It's quite conceptual. So it's not really a straight show. But there's screens and a moon and there's lots going on, yeah.
Okay, well, this is digging a bit back further in your career, but I'm curious about how you scale up comedy like that.
Yeah.
That's got to be a real challenge.
Yeah, when we first won, there was the worst time for us. We won the Perrier Award, which is, I think it's called I'm not sure what it's called now, something else, but it was like the award at Edinburgh Festival. And we had a tiny little show. It was like in a 100-seater or something. And then because we won that award, we had to go to Her Majesty's Theatre, which is 5,000. So our show looked like a puppet show. We didn't, and we were like, right, valuable lesson. You have to scale your show up if you're doing bigger shows. But we were just doing a tour of big theatres, and then we started doing arenas, and the jump up was quite big and scary. And then the next tour, it was mainly arenas, and we sold out a year in advance. So we knew that we were doing that, so we weren't right.
You could plan for it.
I came on a ship and sang Future Sailors, and we had massive back projections, and we had everything.
Was that always the goal, though, to get to that scale of performance?
I think the bigger the better. It's fun and it's like an event, but you have to get used to it because basically, we played the O2 and stuff a couple of times in London, and that's where I go and see the Rolling Stones or Fleetwood Mac or something. So it's ridiculous. It shouldn't really work for comedy because you come out and ultimately, no matter how much how many fireworks you have and how many props you have and how much colour and music you have, at one point you have to go, hey, and do a joke in a really big room, which feels really weird. And especially for a double act, because if you're doing stand-up, you can channel it straight out to the audience and you can get away with it. But in a double act, you have to kind of turn in on each other. And that's quite hard to keep the audience.
Wow.
And the laughs go back a long way and then they come back. So you sort of feel like a laugh's not worked and you get on to the next joke and then the sort of laugh hits you from the last joke. It's a bit like surfing.
That's a strange creative challenge. I'm kind of struck by that. Yeah.
It's not, you couldn't really prepare yourself for that. It would be quite arrogant to yes, when I play arenas, I'll have to work on that. It's like muscles that you would never use, you know. I guess it's funny because when I see Mick Jagger do gigs now, and if I see him on telly and they've recorded a gig, his gestures are so big because he's so used to playing stadiums that when you film it on telly, he looks ridiculous because it's like he's playing to the back row in a stadium in Colombia for 200,000 people.
But he's just been doing that for like 40 years,
he
so
doesn't
you
care
can't
about
blame
television, so it's fine. But there becomes. That sort of does creep in. And then when you do a small gig again, you realise that you can do a lot of subtle stuff with your face and acting-wise that gets big laughs. It doesn't in bigger venues. You have to be quite sort of broad in bigger venues. Well, not broad, but you have to just keep it to the good jokes. You can't sort of do the tiny little nuances. I think Julian wasn't as into that because he's a very good actor. He liked, doing some eyebrow work, little bits of business, as he called it. He likes his business, his comic business. So the bigger the venue, they couldn't see what he was doing.
But you can get back to a little bit of that nuance now with this
A
show.
little bit, yeah. I mean, New York was quite the smallest venue we've done in a long time. Last night was about, 1,200, 1,500. That was a good size for the show, I think. It's sort of enough people to really get a noise going and a dialogue going, but not too big so that you have to have screens or anything. Because that's the other thing. Once you get big, you have to go screens.
You have to go with screens. You have to fill up that space
And
visually,
I have seen Seinfeld at the O2, and you just start watching the screen and then go, I've paid quite a lot of money for this ticket. I should watch the guy, not the screen, because it's just weird.
People don't talk about that enough. That crosses everybody's mind when they're in a big space.
To look at screens, aren't we? On our phones, on our laptops, on the TV. We just can't help it. Even if the man's there, you're going, I'm just watching you on the screen. It's much better. And I went to see David Chappelle in San Francisco, and it was about 3,000, 4,000 maybe 3,000. And he made sure everyone put their phones in like a locked sort of case, a zip case, and there's no screens. It's amazing. You just watch him, and he just comes on. He's amazing. But he just comes on. And he says, whatever goes on in this room stays in this room, basically. There's no photos.
He's gone to great lengths to keep that.
So brilliant, though. I think it's a great idea. And he was brilliant as well. So, but it is like an experience that you remember. You're not sort of looking at your phone the whole time. That is annoying. When we did festivals as the Boosh, people are all on their phones and you think they're going to watch it when they get home.
And you hate to complain about that because that's just the reality now. But at the same time, it is annoying.
It is a little bit annoying, but I guess there's a generation of young, cheeky kids who don't know any different, so they're not bothered by that. It's a strange one because there's been a lot of, especially with technology, there's been a lot of changes just in the 20 years I've been doing comedy, a lot of changes. I mean, like DVDs were kind of worshipped when we were growing up and when we were doing the Boosh, but nowadays kids just download everything. They're on their phones.
It can't be overstated. The changes absolutely cannot be overstated.
And what happens with me, which is weird, I don't know how this happens, but I think maybe because I'm doing something that's quite surreal and maybe timeless or something. It's not specifically about what's going on now, so I'm not talking about Donald Trump or, there's a little bit of that, but I'm not really doing that. There seems to be a certain age of people get to a certain age where they're into what I do. So my audience, not all of it, but a core of my audience stay the same age and I get older, which is quite strange, like a science fiction film.
But ideal.
It's like Dorian Gray in reverse. I just sort of get older and they stay the same.
Well, it's strange, but it's ideal.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, but they like the aspect of the look of the show and the fashion aspect and all those things as well, because in the way that they would like a band or something. So they like those things, which is harder to maintain as you get older because you're not quite in the scene, or cutting edge, or it's harder to stay in that scene the older you get.
Well, I want to ask you about this surreal comedic sensibility and how that developed. So you were born in London to parents in their late teens. It was an artistic household, a little bit 70s bohemian.
Yeah.
What are your best lasting memories of that environment?
I think they had a lot of parties when I was a kid, so they had a lot of weird people around. And I guess the 70s, there were a lot of drugs. I wasn't really aware of it, but I'm imagining that if you go to a party now, it's mainly alcohol. Whereas I think in the 70s, I remember my mum and dad having parties where, someone would turn up and bring the taxi driver in and he would stay for 2 days. It was quite loose, the 70s, on the sofa. And after about a week, my mum and dad were like, you might have to leave now. The party finished 2 days ago. And, a lot of colourful characters. I think maybe in hindsight, they were just quite young. They were 19, 20, so their friends were all quite crazy and never went to bed. And I suppose I grew up around that. And then there's quite a big age gap between me and my brother. I think he didn't get that. He's like 8, 9 years younger than me. So they sort of got their stuff together by the time they brought him up, and they were much harsher with him. So he's always.
Do you see differences between you and your brother as a result of that?
Yeah, I mean, I was like a feral child. I was like, I'm not eating dinner. Yeah, whatever, cook your own at midnight. Mum, it's midnight. Should I go to bed? Well, whatever you want to do. It was quite bohemian. And then I think with my brother, they thought we should probably make him go to bed if he's got school in the morning. And we probably shouldn't let him cook his own dinner of mashed potato on toast at 4 a.m. He's like 6. So I think there was a lot of dress up in my house, and I was quite good at drawing. So I was always drawing and making stuff. My mum and dad were pretty liberal about stuff, and I think maybe that's why I ended up doing what I did, I guess.
Well, that's a good thing. And the sense of style as well.
And my mum and dad were funny as well. Yeah, when they were always into rock, it was like a rock. They like into Jimi Hendrix and Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart and stuff that was a little bit more alternative, and Hawkwind. And they weren't necessarily... They liked the bigger bands as well, but they weren't... A lot of my friends' parents were into the Beatles and the Kinks, whereas my mum and dad were always into Hawkwind and lots of strange stuff that was a bit more frightening as a child. Hawkwind used to scare me when I was a kid, and they used to go and see Hawkwind. When I was a kid, I couldn't really understand. Mum and Dad would show me these record covers. That's why records were so important when I was growing up, because the covers were always quite interesting, and the art on the covers, like, wow, who are these? But like, the first time I saw Kiss, couldn't understand because they looked like superheroes, but they were in a band, and I was like, oh, I don't know what's going on here. And then when my mum and dad said they're coming to England, I was like, no, I don't want to get involved in that. That's too frightening. Get lost.
But there's something about entertainment when you're a kid that is a little bit frightening. But there's something enticing about it and intriguing about it.
Yeah. All the things that frightened you as a kid are the things you end up being really influenced by. Like, I was quite into this band called The Tubes, and I was quite into Hawkwind, as I say, and Kiss, and a lot of things that were a bit frightening for me. And then I ended up sort of trying to recreate some of those things that they did.
I thought Prince was terrifying as a child.
Yeah.
Until I was 20.
Because sort of androgynous, sort of strange look, otherworldly,
height, weird,
yeah, just like quite an odd character. He's quite Bowie-like, isn't he? He's quite alien-like. I was fascinated by Prince as well, and then he made films like Elvis. You just sort of that as well. When you're a kid growing up, you go, well, this guy's he's in a band, but he makes films as well. He looks like that. And then there's that point where he just covered his head for ages and changed his name. I was like, wow, this guy's blowing my mind.
Okay, to give our listeners some background here, in 1998, you founded the Mighty Boosh as a stage act, and in 2004, the TV show hit BBC. We're going to play a clip with Noel and his partner, Julian Barrett, playing their alter egos, Vince Noir and Howard Moon.
Look, the thing is, Howard, it doesn't matter how old you are, bouncy castles are still genius. I went on one a couple of weeks ago. It was amazing. I bounced as high as my own head.
Really?
Yeah.
As if you did.
I did.
Did you do any somersaults?
I did 6 somersaults.
6?
And I did one of those things where you go backwards and land on your feet. I don't even know what they're called, but they are cool.
Jimmy flips?
I did a Jimmy flip.
Really?
It was amazing, Howard. You'd have loved it. Bouncy, bouncy. Oh, such a good time, bouncy, bouncy. Shoes all in a line, bouncy, bouncy. Everybody somersault, somersault, summertime. Everybody sing along, bouncy, bouncy. Oh, such a good time, bouncy, bouncy. White socks slipping down, bouncy, bouncy. Stilettos are a no-no, bouncy, bouncy. Ooh, bouncy, bouncy. Ooh, every time I bounce, I feel I touch the sky.
I'm not interested, okay?
A scene from the Mighty Boosh TV show. No, that show.
Not heard that for ages. Julian still cracks me up. Where is Julian? He should be here.
That show is a pretty crazy mix: sketch comedy, costumes, rock and roll, all sorts of things. We talked about your childhood influences, but was part of that a reaction to anything you were seeing in British culture?
Yeah, I think so. I think Julian was a bit older than me. His dad was more of a jazzer. He was into Santana and a lot of jazz. Miles Davis and stuff. Julian's a big jazzer, so I was sort of a bit more rock and roll and pop when he was a bit more jazz. But then we sort of met in the middle with electro. We both liked Gary Newman. We were quite obsessed with Gary Newman. But Julian was, I think he left university to join a band. We were both in bands before we were in the Boosh, so we sort of came from that background. A lot of our friends were in bands, and the first people to catch on to the Boosh really were a lot of bands who watched it on the tour bus on DVD, you know. And then NME, the magazine in England, they sort of gave us a lot of awards, and they sort of got people onto it. They gave us a lot of covers. I think I think we were quite into Peter Cook and Spike Milligan and Monty Python and the Young Ones, and we felt we came from that sort of, you know, we were part of that lineage. Whereas I think what happened was when we started doing comedy, The Office was pretty big, and that realistic sort of mockumentary style, which Gervais nailed, you know. So that was massive. So there were a million shows like that, and that was what was popular. And what we were doing was quite out of fashion at that point. We were sort of much more trying to do a Python-y kind of Time Bandits sort of goodies type thing. And just people weren't really interested in that at the time. And then slowly it sort of came back in fashion. But so we were trying not to be... There's a lot of that going on in England. We were trying not to get sucked into that mockumentary, realistic style. We were trying to sort of keep it fantastical and classic. Edward Lear, sort of Lewis Carroll. But yeah, we came from completely different places, and he was a bit like a big brother. I mean, he's such a good performer, Julian. I do miss performing with him. And we wrote everything together. We wrote every line together. It was quite a personal, sort of tight relationship. So it was a bit like a marriage. Once we had a break, because we never really broke up, we just did 15 years together, and we were like, I could draw his face, with, you know, without looking, without a pencil, and he could. I'm sure he was sick of me, and we just had a break. But then it was difficult to find a way back because we'd been so tight that we were very much in love. And then it was like we've had a break, and we keep slightly looking for ways back to each other, and I think we will eventually try a film.
You're still close.
We live on the same street, which is ridiculous. Like literally. He lives like 10 houses away from me. He can see into my bedroom, which is, I think he's got the best deal there. I can see into his front room. He can see into my bedroom.
I think I can, I'm seeing a movie here kind of based on that. But when you guys split, it was 2009, and you guys were kind of at the peak of your popularity, as you said, playing sold out arena tours.
Yeah, it was kind of kamikaze.
Yeah, why the timing?
I think with comedy, it's different. When you're in a band, if you make a really good album, and you can even do that in your bedroom, and then you bring it out, and the world goes, "This is great," and then suddenly you're on tour, and I think with comedy, there's kind of no way of accelerating that process of trying to get to the point that you want to. You have to do tons of gigs. You have to get good at live stuff. You have to get good at writing. You have to learn all that stuff. You can't. I think you can learn that stuff if you're in a band when you're 14, 13. Well, now kids are like 10.
Yeah.
But by the time you're 16, 17, you could have made a really good album. Whereas I think when you're 20, you're a comedian, you're probably not going to be as good as you think you are. It sort of takes you quite a while. So I think by the time we were ready with the Boosh, I was probably 30 and he was probably 35. So we were a bit older. So we'd already been doing it 10 years. So then when people started catching up, there was, in that 5 years where it was really crazy. They thought it was brand new, and we've been doing it a long time, The Beatles were only together for like 10 years or something, and we've been together already like 15 by the time we broke up. So it is a long time to maintain those relationships. And I think maybe what happened is we added a lot of people into the cracks, when we were slightly falling apart, we put in a lot of other things to try and hold
other writers and things.
Not so much writers, but it became much more like a big band, and we had my brothers Naboo in the show and Rich Fulcher's in it, and Dave Brown. There was a lot of stuff, people, band members. It was all. But I think really what needed to happen was me and him should have had a little break and then come back together, because it was always about me and him really, and what we could create in a room, and it's always about that. So. But we're still friends, and we still keep talking about doing a film, because we never did a film, and that was the first thing we wanted to do. So,
well, reportedly, Canada's own Mike Meyers was interested in making a film at one point.
Yeah.
What happened there?
He was a pretty fascinating guy, actually. We went around his house, and he sort of said, I've got an idea for a film, a sort of time travel film. And he was quite like a comedy professor or something. He was very much into the theory of comedy, and he was quite interesting to chat to. He had a good idea as well, actually. But it's one of those classic things where at that point in America, and we were massive in England, Ben Stiller was kind of calling up to get DVDs. Jack Black was interested. Robin Williams came to the gigs. Mike Meyers was inviting us to his house. So we were sort of the toast of the town. Maybe we didn't realise how significant that was at
that
the
moment.
time. Yeah, and that we could have capitalised on it. But we never really did anything in that way. We were never very commercially... We're not commercially minded. We were much more like some Frank Zappa or Captain Beefheart or something. We were much more... If the mood and the vibe was right, we'd make something and we'd do it for the right reasons. And we never really thought about money that much or career steps or anything like that. So that was all quite alien to us. So when we got quite big, and then we were obviously generating quite a lot of money doing arenas and stuff, we became quite a big thing. We a lot of managers appeared and it became like a big machine, like we were in Pink Floyd or something. And we weren't very... I don't think we were into that. We kind of...
It's not your thing.
No, and we sort of, a bit like David Chappelle, I guess, but not as extreme, but we sort of retreated a little bit from it because it started to become this big juggernaut that we couldn't control. And because it was such an odd thing, really, when we did the O2, I remember Julian saying, did you ever think that we would be playing to 20,000 people? And I thought, yeah, I did in a weird way. But then again, we didn't compromise, We were still playing characters like old Greg, who's a a merman with a mangina and, a sea transsexual. We didn't really compromise. So the idea that we would get that big was quite shocking to us anyway, because it was always quite alternative what we were doing.
Well, I find that especially fascinating then that you did at the same time have an inkling that this could catch on, even though it is quite eccentric and,
I thought there was a classicness there, mainly the double act, and Julian is a very brilliant comic actor, and I'm good at generating ideas. We had a sort of Spike Milligan, Peter Sellers sort of relationship, a good relationship like bands do, like a Mick and Keith thing or a John Lennon and Paul McCartney. We had very different skills, but we really complemented each other. What I could do, he couldn't do, and vice versa.
Quite a rare thing.
And I've never really found that with anyone else, and he hasn't, I don't think. I don't think we ever would. It's a one-in-a-lifetime deal. So I felt like there was a very classic Laurel and Hardiness to it, a double act thing at the heart of it, and we were friends, and that was very appealing in a broad way. It was just maybe the tone of it was much more surreal, like Python or something, but I think that's kind of okay if the other stuff is the foundations are good for what you're doing, the double act and all of that stuff, then everything else falls into place. It doesn't really matter what kind of comedy you're doing,
Well, maybe this is the break that you're talking about that you guys needed, and you'll come back with the film in your own time. If you're just joining us, Noel Fielding is here. The UK comic is on tour right now in North America with his stage show, An Evening with Noel Fielding. I'm Shad, and this is Q. So, Noel, you've been a constant presence on UK TV since the Boosh years. You've also had your own solo series, Noel Fielding's Luxury Comedy, which ran for 2 seasons. And we're happy to see you, but what made you want to go on tour and come here right now?
I think maybe because of the way that I started with stand-up, and Julian started doing stand-up. I think he'd done some acting at university plays and stuff, but we were always good live. We were quite good live performers in our own right. Then we got together, and the Boosh, we were quite good at live stuff. We knew how to play to an audience really well. So we did 3 Edinburgh shows, and then we did radio, then TV. We had quite a sort of a normal sort
trajectory.
Yeah, really. I think we went from 3 live shows, then we did a radio show, then we did a TV show, then we did another one, and then we were quite keen to get back to live because we knew we could do it. So a lot of TV comedians can't really do the live audience. It's quite a different skill, So when we did our first live show, all the people that liked our TV show were like, oh my, they're really good live, And then we did another TV show, then we did another live show. That was what we were best at, really. And I sort of felt the same. I felt like with Luxury, as much as I enjoyed doing Luxury, because it was a bit like a relief or a release from all of the craziness, because we got quite famous in England and I got it sucked into the whole party lifestyle. It was all crazy. It's like it's your birthday every day. And it's like you go to parties, you meet all these crazy people, but the work was always what was most important. But I think because the Boosh slightly got derailed, I had a lot of stuff in my head that I wanted to get out, but I wanted to make an experimental show, with animation styles and lots of different stuff. But yeah, it was quite a tricky show, that because you really need to see it more than once. It's not really a show you can dip in and out of. It's sort of a crazy. It's quite it's undiluted. It's quite crazy. So I think it wasn't for everyone, which is sort of fine. I enjoyed making it, but
you always have that back and forth. It's kind of like
then I want it to
something, write something, and then I want to go back to the stage.
Yeah, and that's the most exciting bit for me, is to make a TV show, and then bring those characters in to life, for an audience. So if an audience watches a TV show and they like Fantasy Man, then when they come and see me, if Fantasy Man comes out, they're like, oh my God, he's doing Fantasy Man. Like, I guess the same with, if David Chappelle did Rick James, the roof would disintegrate, It's like the idea that something you've seen on television, as we were talking about that before, this generation watch everything on catch up and on laptops, and so the idea that something that they've watched in their bedroom, then they come see you and you play those characters. I think there's something quite nice about it.
It kind of lifts the veil too a little bit and shows this is how it developed. It didn't start on television. It started with a human being and an idea and actually acting this out physically live in person.
And television's tricky to get right, I think the strike rate with television's very low. There are a lot of shows that are okay, and there are a lot of shows that are bad, and there are a few shows that are really good, and there are a tiny amount of shows that are brilliant. And I think it's just because they're generating shows constantly, and maybe unless the show's a really good script and it has really good actors in it, the chances are it's not going to do, Cheers or something is amazing because it's brilliant scripts, brilliant script writers, brilliant performers, chemistry, just those things don't come along very often, or Seinfeld or something. But I think maybe telly's difficult to get right. So if people do like what you do on television, then they come see you live and you present some of those characters for them. It's quite exciting, I think. Hopefully. Come and see.
Come and see. There's still another show in Toronto. Now, I want to ask you about that clip that I played off the top.
Oh, yeah.
About turning 40 or 35, however you want to put it. You joked there about energy level.
Well, I sort of do this thing where I talk about being 40 and everyone cheers because they want to be nice, but then it's I ask how many people are over 40 and it's a very weak cheer compared to the under 40s. It's like they go crazy. And I do a joke about when you're over 40, it's amazing that you even went out on a Tuesday. Like, you should probably be in your house in a dress, because it ruins the rest of your week. A big night on a Tuesday, if you're over 40, you're finished. But I sort of talk about being over 40, saying it's not that good, but then I kind of turn it back on the youngsters, because I do some bleak comedy for the over 40s who are closer to death and who want some truth, who want some real bleak comedy. And then I say the youngsters are not going to be able to handle this. And so I sort of play with the younger people and the older people. And I try and bond with someone who's also over 40, a helium balloon. So it's quite a truthful bit of comedy for me, because I don't really tend to work in that way. So, I mean... The other stuff, I play a half man, half chicken in my stand-up, and I sort of also do a routine about lots of tea bags, where I'm a herbal tea bag in a cupboard. So
it's a rare moment
of truth that people seem to like. Yeah.
Well, what is the truth? How did the anticipation of turning 40 compare to the realities for you?
I think it depends who you are. I've got friends who love being over 40. They're like, it's great, and in a weird way, you don't care as much. So it is better, and it's a bit easier, because I think when you're in your 20s, you're worried about what everyone thinks all the time, and I know I was like that. And then in your 30s, you're sort of trying to prove yourself all the time. Hey, I'm this person. I'm like this. And whereas when you get to 40, you sort of don't care. You go, well, I've sort of said who I am, and that's fine. I'm not that bothered. But also your priorities change. But because I'm a bit of a Peter Pan figure, I don't have a wife or kids or any of those trappings of adulthood. It is a strange transition for me, because a lot of my friends have 4 kids, a dog, a house, a holiday home, a car. I haven't got anything.
Not even a car.
I just sit on a big pile of vintage clothes, eating granola. I don't know who I am. So there is a little bit of that. But then this lifestyle as well, the touring lifestyle is quite hard. I mean, in the Boosh tour, we did a 100-date tour, and we had 1 day off a week to travel. And we were playing arenas, and we partied every single night, and we got up for sound check at 6 o'clock. So we were like Dracula. I was like Dracula. So I'd wake up at 6, do a sound check, wake up, do the show, go to a party, stay up till 5 a.m, sleep all day, every day for 100. So it's like you can't do that when you're in your 40s.
That cannot be sustained.
No, that's something for when you're in your 20s, maybe in your 30s. So, I mean, we gave Aerosmith a run for their money, but that was quite fun. So now I'm sort of having quite a lot of fun doing tours and having a look at cities and seeing stuff in the daytime, and then occasionally having a crazy night, because you've got all this adrenaline inside you, so you still have to go out every now and then. It's like a release.
So still fun, but a different kind of fun.
Yeah, pick your battles, I think, so that you don't ruin yourself.
You did say, though, that when you get a little bit older, you have less of this pressure to prove yourself.
Yeah.
I think that's true if you're lucky and you have proved yourself.
Yeah.
I think some people fight that for a while. So do you count yourself lucky that you've been able to establish a career? Like, how do you feel about this point in your life and career?
I sort of feel like with the Boosh, we just did what we naturally would have done, and for some reason, it wasn't like a mainstream success. Even in England, it took a long time for people to cotton onto it, and it was a slow burn, but it always just kept growing and growing. But we realised, probably not while we were making it. We did by the end because it got huge, but we realised that we'd made something that people weren't going to sort of forget in a year or so. People still would come up to us and go every day and go, "Oh, I love the Boosh. Oh, I can't wait to show my kids the Boosh. My kid's like 4, I'm going to show him the Boosh. I'm so excited." And I think we realised that we might have made something a bit like the Young Ones or something that people would remember. And I suddenly realised that I probably was never going to make anything as good as that again. Or not as good as that, but that was the thing that worked. And there was a sort of chemistry and a thing about it that was sort of great. And then that's okay, though. Once you realise that's probably, it's like being in a band.
Well, you have to find peace with that. Some artists don't.
It's like being in a really good band and then doing solo stuff and realising you're not going to recreate that moment in time. Probably what we were doing at the time was fresher, because maybe we were doing a lot of musical stuff in comedy, but that's quite common now. At the time, maybe just us and the Concords were doing that. I mean, not that people hadn't done that historically, but I think it had gone out of favour and come back in, and it was quite fantastical. No one had ever really seen anything like the Boosh. I see a lot of the Boosh now when I do comedy with the young comedians. I see a bit of Russell Brand. I see a lot of the Concords, Yeah. You see the things that have influenced the next generation, that's amazing. I mean, that blows my mind, because we didn't set out to
Very
do
satisfying.
that. Yeah, and also just I love watching young comics, because, it's the next thing, and you do see stuff and you go, wow, that's definitely the next thing, I think you have a point, like a window, where you're ready to make something that people haven't quite, they're not ready for, and then it's quite shocking and powerful. But then maybe I feel like sort of now when I make stuff, it's in a similar vein, but it will never have that impact of when we first did it together.
Because that's a matter of timing and all sorts of other things.
Yeah, and the zeitgeist and everything, stuff you can't control. So, but once you're fine with that, and you realise that people will come and see your other stuff because they like what you did in the Boosh and stuff, and that there will be elements of that in it, then you're sort of all right, and you can be at peace with yourself.
Well, final question. What keeps you inspired right now?
Wow. Lots of things. Film, music, other comedians, reading, books. I'm reading a book at the moment about an old lady in a home. It's by this, she was a surrealist painter called Leonora Carrington. It's about a 93-year-old who's in a home, who's going to get put in a home, and she's deaf, so she doesn't realise that her friend gives her a hearing trumpet so she can hear everyone, but they don't know she's got it. So they don't know that she knows that they're going to put her in a home, so they're going to escape. I don't know what's going to happen in this story, but it's really hilarious. They're going to escape this home, her and her friend, who are 90-year-old women. It was written like in the 60s or something, but she was like a surrealist painter and was married to Max Ernst, this painter. But someone just gave that book to me and said, "You like this surrealist painter wrote this book, and it's about a 90-year-old woman in a home." And I thought, yeah, that sounds great. You never know where the next inspiration's going to come from.
And music still inspires you. Who's inspiring you right now?
I really there's this Australian band called Tame Impala that I really like. I mean, they've sort of got quite big now, but there's a sort of sister band called Pond, and then the guy from Pond used to be in Tame Impala, and I really like their stuff. They've got a whole sort of movement, a whole scene going on, Tame Impala and Pond and all those people. lots of stuff really. I never really know where it's going to come from, and I always try and keep looking back to stuff. There's always stuff you didn't know existed, which always blows my mind, that you suddenly go, wow, I didn't know this band existed, and then you find some little treasure that you've not ever heard of before. You know? I think you just have to keep watching stuff, especially live, because at the lower levels of stuff, where stuff's not quite famous yet, it's all raw and power. When I got all my stand-up together for this tour, I was doing clubs, and there were some really amazing people who were just ready and bursting, and they've been doing it, and they're on it, And then a lot of those people were really inspiring, because they were just younger and raw and hungry. I'm Rocky Balboa. They were hungry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you said earlier to me is really fascinating, that there is no shortcut with stand-up comedy like there is with music and other things. So to see a comic at that juncture where they are, at a special moment, just about to
and then
rise.
go and see the greats. Like, I was really happy to go and see David Chappelle, because I've been a big Chappelle fan for ages. I was like, I've got to see him live. It's not the same, because the thing is, live stuff, there's just something about it. When you watch stuff on DVD or whatever, or on YouTube, it's not the same. But like seeing him in a room, the way he's and the way he's matured, because he's not that kind of skinny, slightly gawky. He's got a funny voice, David Chappelle, and a funny face, but he's much more like a man now. He's quite bigger, and he's got a bit of a preacher vibe about him now. And there's something, he's kind of matured in a quite a good way for stand-up, I think. So
interesting. I want to ask you more about that when we wrap up, but unfortunately we're out of time now. Thank you for joining me here.
That was great. Thanks a lot.